always say this in my work and also when it comes to Israel. We moderates need to be more extreme in our moderation because we're so moderate and we don't fight back with fire and with passion that the extremists who are going to go full force, they're going to run us over because we don't stand together and hold that middle ground. And if we don't recognize that we have so much more in common than we don't agree on, we're all going to lose. If we don't stand and hold hands and keep that middle ground, we're going to lose it from both sides. And 100%. All we're going to sit and do is blame each other at the end when we're underneath the left and the right who've come together to crush us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Today, my guest is a friend of mine named Shoshanna Keats Jaskoll. Shoshanna is an American-Israeli writer and activist. She's co-founder of, you're going to have to help me with this, Shoshanna.
Chochmat Nashim.
Chochmat
Nashim.
Chochmat Nashim, which is Hebrew for women's wisdom. She fights extremism in the Orthodox community and raises the voices and faces of women. With a stock photo bank from JewishLifePhotos.com of real Orthodox Jewish women and families, she fights the erasure of women's images. And via RateMyBeatDin.com, she gives voice to the community to improve the rabbinic court system where too many women find themselves chained to dead marriages. Her work can be found in the Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, UK Jewish Chronicle, and more, where she writes about women's issues and Israel. Shoshanna, welcome.
A pleasure, a pleasure to be here, especially today.
So when we met in Tel Aviv, you gave me a beautiful mug that was covered in all of these images of the beautiful women. So that must have been from, there it is. There it is. Beautiful. So we're going to get to talking about that today. But before we get into speaking about you and all of your activism and all of your amazing work, I just wanted to acknowledge that today, 4 beautiful young women made it home. 3 women made it home a while ago, a few days ago. And we're all just in this emotional turmoil right now, incredibly happy to see these girls coming home.
Yeah.
All of us joyful and crying, seeing them hugging their parents, seeing their moms full of joy. And it's a beautiful day, which is always laced, of course, with the feelings of like the first thing my husband said is like, oh, these girls have a long road ahead of them, you know?
Absolutely.
So we're so happy that they're home and the healing can begin. You know, we're happy that they're out of hell and now they can start, you know, the process of healing. This is the beginning of the story.
Yeah. So it's a really very, very, very emotional. It's emotional for so many reasons. You know, there are hundreds of terrorists being let out in exchange for these young women, and the price is high. I mean, I know multiple people whose family members or themselves were, I mean, they weren't killed, but either harmed or family members were killed by these people who are being released. And it's a very bittersweet feeling, but there's no question that for most Israelis, almost all Israelis, like the obligation to free these people comes before, or at least it outweighs to a real extent, you know, the price that we have to pay. But these 4 young women particularly, they were, I don't know how much people know, but there's a position in the IDF called the Tatzpitanit, which is a very, very hard word that I didn't know until this war, which means that they were the lookout. They each had like a 30-meter section of the border that they would sit and watch. That was their job in the IDF. They weren't armed. They weren't trained to be fighters. They would literally look at a screen and guard the border and let people know if something was going on. And they did. And they did. And they were ignored. And so these 4 young ladies are I think only 6 or 7 survived. I think 16 of them were killed on the October 7th, and they were dragged, Nama Levy particularly. I don't think there's anyone who hasn't seen the young woman who was put, you know, by her hair, dragged out of a Jeep with bloodied sweatpants. She was released today. And I'm sorry, it's very difficult because we don't know what she went through. We don't know what she endured, but the strength of these women is so amazing. They knew that their parents would be looking at every picture and video, and they came out for their loved ones with hearts
Yeah,
like this. Like they they wanted them to see that they were okay, even if they are broken inside, even if they have so far to go. Like the strength of these young women. Hamas made a pomp and circumstance out of this. I don't know how much you saw, but they gave them gift bags like they were coming out
they
of bar
stood them up
mitzvah.
on the stage and got them to wave, and yeah, as if
Anyway,
we're
I'm
gonna
sorry.
forget seeing them dragging her by her hair, shoving her into a vehicle barefoot with blood all over her. Like, we're not going to forget that. We're not going to forget the images that we got with, girls with bloodied faces. Now suddenly they're wearing their khaki outfits and they're standing on a stage and they're waving, and we're going to all be like, "Oh, yay, what heroes,
They must have
everything's
had a great
forgotten."
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a very emotional day, and we're
Yeah.
going to this is going to be repeated, but these four young women really, really, really had to come home. So thank God.
Yeah. And there was one more young woman who was supposed to come home today.
Agam.
Agam Berger, her cousin came on my podcast. Ashley came on my podcast to speak about Agam, and her name was on the list. We were expecting her to be
Mhm.
coming home as well. And then suddenly it was only four girls. So I'm concerned. I'm not really getting any news. All I read was one-liners that say something like Agam will stay in Gaza or something. Like there's just not enough information.
So Hamas has been playing games a lot. Just as an example, a lot of not of Is- a lot of Israelis keep Shabbat, especially Agam's family. It's been well publicized that she keeps Shabbat in honor of her trying to get her home.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
so Hamas was supposed to give the list already days ago, and they didn't give it until Shabbat had already come in yesterday. And for those of you who don't know, people who keep Shabbat don't go on the telephone, they don't go on the television, they don't get the news unless someone else brings it to them who is not keeping Shabbat. And the psychological warfare that they play on purpose. So it's just part of this, it's just part of the psychological, at every moment they try to do what they can to torture, and it works. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it works. It's very painful. It's very difficult.
I mean, they are a terrorist organization. They know how to torture. That's what they do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you spoke about the hundreds of people that are being released. I think it was 200 that were released today, in exchange for
50
these four
for
young
50
women.
per soldier, if I'm not mistaken, even if they're, 19-year-old and they had just been literally, I think, a few months on the job. But yes, 200. Yeah, you're right.
Mhm. And what they're doing is they're pawning them off to like different countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, whoever's willing to take them. And I guess the idea behind that is that if they are all in Gaza, of course, they're all going to unite with Hamas and they will be heroes there. And that will be, obviously horrible for the whole world. Um, but then the idea of like littering Palestine's garbage throughout the rest of the Arab world isn't a good idea either. Like, I don't know there was no good answer to this. You want to release people from prison who are rapists, who are killers, who are in there for life imprisonment.
Hmm.
These are not like political prisoners, you know what I mean, who are like
Yes.
protesting or something. Like these are
Right.
hardcore criminals. And yeah, so countries like Egypt are taking them in for like a week and then they're pawning them off somewhere else. And the scores of people that are celebrating
Yeah.
the arrival of terrorists into their home. Like it makes it really difficult for me to maintain my optimism that these extremists are a minority in the Arab and
Right.
Muslim world. When you see images like that, like it just turns your stomach. It's humiliating, it's gross, it's sickening. And I just, what about all the people that were tortured and imprisoned by Hamas? Where were all of these people to celebrate them?
Yeah.
Nowhere. They were nowhere. Those people are in Germany or in Sweden or in France or, somewhere else. They're not in the Arab world. They're not being
Right,
celebrated there. They're
right.
celebrating terrorists and people that are criminals and rapists.
So I think about that a lot. I think about two aspects. Number one, and obviously, this conversation is happening around many people's tables. We had a conversation today. I do believe terrorists who, instead of being served life sentence, they should be killed. I'm not this the word is I think when you go back to crime. I can't say the word,
Yeah,
but it's a very high rate of returning to terror, returning to crime. Like we know that.
it's
We see it
absolutely.
from last time, Yahya Sinwar, who
Yep.
orchestrated October 7th, was released for Gilad Shalit. So we
Yep.
know that this we have to put, what is it called when you have to disrupt this cycle. And I don't know why Israel does not have a death penalty,
Do you not
because
have,
we
okay,
don't
so
have a
do you
death
have
penalty.
capital punishment at all there? Okay, so
Israel's only ever executed one person, and that was Eichmann.
that's really strange for like a country like an Old Testament
Yeah,
majority people. Like, come
we're a
on,
big
guys.
conundrum here in Israel, like a big contradictions. When we talk about the work that I do, but we'll talk about how like women could be prime ministers and Supreme Court judges, but we can't get a divorce. It's a super strange mix
Hmm.
of things. But yeah, I mean, I do think we should have a death penalty so that this isn't rewarded. And by the way, Yasmin, it's because I think Palestinian kids deserve better heroes. They
Of
deserve to grow up
course.
to be
Yep.
to look up to doctors, lawyers,
Yep.
whatever, not
Yep.
terrorists. And I feel like,
Exactly.
what future are you giving your
And that's
children?
exactly it. That's exactly it because they paint these terrorists on murals and they do turn them into heroes, and
Yes.
that is the sad reality. And when they come out of Israeli prison, it's like they have survived. Do you know what I mean? So they are seen truly as superheroes. And so
Yes.
and that's what happened exactly like you said. That's exactly what happened to Yahya Sinwar, right? He wouldn't never have reached these levels of, what he
Mm.
reached if he hadn't survived being in Israeli prison, where they
And
saved his life, by the way. He had brain
exactly.
cancer. You're gonna, yeah.
Exactly.
And
Like,
they thinking this is the frustrating thing for me too, is because Israeli people, I feel like they project their humanity onto others. And they think, oh, well, we're going to save this man's life. And then, of course, it will have to soften his heart to Jewish people because of what we've done. No, it won't. What you said about recidivism is absolutely correct. They are one track minded people. It's so hard for people to understand that. So I saw him, the man that they forced me to marry when I was 19. He was, he went to prison initially, 15 years hard labor. And
wow.
then he got out under Morsi, under the Muslim Brotherhood president. And what did he do? Straight right back into terrorism, was arrested in Malaysia, sent back. Right. And now this time it was for good. But this is it doesn't matter. He was in there for 15 years.
It's
And
wild.
the minute he
It's
got
just
out, he's
wild.
like, I gotta die for sabilillah. I have to do this. Like
So
that's the only goal.
you speak a lot about this, and I really wish, I mean, I anyway wish more people would listen to you, but I really wish more people would listen to you because you understand the mentality. You understand, and we refuse to. There is a refusal, like you said, we project and we refuse to understand that values are not the same. If you value death as a shaheed, what what's going to
Polar
change
opposite.
that?
Polar opposite of the Jewish tradition of valuing life so much, right? They value death. They truly do. And they say it over and over and over again. Whether
Right.
it's in Afghanistan or whether it's in London or whether it's in America, they all say it. The ones who believe in this ideology are very transparent. They say it from the pulpits in the khutbah in the mosques every Friday, right? We want
Hmm.
death. Death is
Yeah.
when everything begins. Life is nothing but they call it like a stopover. Like if you're
Mm,
the stopover country, if you're on your way somewhere else, like this is nothing. This is meaningless. This is useless. This is
right.
nothing.
This world
And so
is
there
is
is
a
no
temporary thing.
Yeah, there is no value. And then that's why you see people celebrating when their children die as shaheeds and they're handing out candy and whatever. They really think that their kids are going to heaven. You know, there is an imam in America, in Detroit, Michigan, and he was talking about how killing Jewish people is a win-win situation, or trying to kill them is a win-win. Because if you kill them, one less Jew in the world. If you don't and you get killed, well, you're going to go to heaven anyway. So why not try?
Yeah,
You know, just go for it.
you
It's
have
a
good odds.
win-win. This
Heads
is,
you, heads
yeah,
you win, tails you win.
this is how they talk.
So my
So,
12-year-old was leaning over my shoulder tonight when I was watching the videos that came through afterwards, and it was showing like Hamas like it panned through Gaza when they took out these girls and they made them stand on stage, and there were kids with guns,
yeah,
kids younger than he goes, why are there kids with guns? And it's something that we think of, but this was such a moment of just innocent, like he's just watching this video with me, and he's like, why are there kids with guns? And I realized like the stark difference between the way I'm trying to raise my children and the way these people are raising their children. And we are, right? We're here. It's us
it's
versus
like
them.
two
And
different planets.
it's right here. Meaning it's just it's very
Hmm.
hard. It's very hard.
Hmm.
I don't know what to
Yeah.
say.
I don't know what to say either. And I've always, days like this, it's hard for me to maintain my optimism, as I was saying, but I have always felt so. My dad was born and raised in Gaza, and he's never been anti-Semitic, right? He was a huge, peaceful, protesting person. He never even would wear the keffiyeh. He called it the terrorist towel. That's what he called it. So I grew up kind of knowing that you could be from that area of the world and, advocate for your homeland without being an anti-Semite. But then I also had my mom's side of the family who
Mhm.
were viciously anti-Semitic. They're from Egypt. Like they had nothing. They got no reason other than it's just like Jews are everything bad in the world. And anything bad that happens is because of the Jews. So I had both sides of that. But what I learned from my dad was that he grew up in an Israel or in a Gaza where Israelis were coming in, then they would go to Gaza and they would go swimming, they'd go fishing, they'd spend the day on the beach. Like it was like the
Mm,
interaction. There were Jewish people living in Gaza at the time, and there because he had so much interaction with Jewish people his whole life,
mm,
the boogeyman, you know, conspiracy theory, vicious genocidal hate that my mom grew up with just wasn't possible. It wasn't possible
interesting.
because my mom never met a Jewish person in her life. So it's easy to sell that to somebody who's
Mm.
never met. It's easy to dehumanize them when you've never met them. But it
I
was
hear
for my
you,
dad,
and
it didn't
then
work.
but unfortunately, we know that a lot of the people on October 7th were people who worked in Israel.
Yeah,
Like,
I
it's
know.
tragic to
Yeah.
say, and I probably wouldn't have said it, or I mean, I know I wouldn't have said it before October 7th, and it was hard for me to believe, but at a certain point, you also have to be like, okay, you can be nice and open-hearted, but not when it actually is
No,
is is
of course not.
your delusionment away.
Suicidal empathy is what Gadsad calls it. Yeah.
That is actually excellently put.
Yeah.
That is excellently put. Yeah, so there's a lot of re-education that has to happen, uneducation
Hmm.
and then re-education that has to happen if there's going to be peace. I want peace. Like this
Hmm.
is not what I want. I don't want it for my
Of
kids.
course.
But like
Hmm.
here we are in this bizarre. I'm watching these videos tonight. And I'm looking and I'm saying, I can't believe we're in this. This is real. This is not a movie. This is real.
Hmm.
And just getting your mind into it is extraordinarily difficult. And I don't know where we go from here. I have to be honest, I don't know.
I don't know either, but I'm happy to see some hostages coming home, and I look forward to seeing many, many more. And let's just
Amen.
try as much as we can to focus on that part for some time and, pull ourselves out of the darkness of all the other
Yes. Take the light
millions
where
of
you can
things
get
that
it.
are happening. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was we're half an hour in and I told you I might have to take a little bit more of your time than I asked for, but you let me know if you need to leave.
No
But
problem.
let's get started with talking about Shoshanna now. Let's talk about you.
Sure.
So you are an American Israeli. Did you grow up in America? Did you grow up in Israel? What was your childhood like? Um, and how did you get interested in like standing up for women within the Orthodox community? What inspired you? Did you see some things that made you feel like you needed to champion these women? Tell us about your experiences. So I want to hear all about your childhood and then what led you to become the champion for women that you are.
Okay. All about my childhood.
Big, big question. Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in actually Lakewood, New Jersey, which is now a very, very Jewish town. Then there was definitely a yeshiva back then, but it was I went to I went from Jewish schools to public schools, back to Jewish schools, back and forth, and I was one of the few white girls in my high school, to be honest. It was 80% minority blacks and well, now it's Latinos, I think we say, or Hispanic. But I was exposed to everything. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I was very culturally Jewish, but not necessarily religious, but I knew a lot. My mom made sure that I went to Jewish schools so that I knew a lot. So I grew up in a place where like on Shabbat, even if like you were, there's different categories of Jews now, like Orthodox or Reform or conservative or whatever, and people dress differently depending on, now I cover my head as an Orthodox woman. My mom doesn't, my sisters don't. And there are various levels that people keep. And back then, people said Shabbat Shalom to you regardless of what you wore. It didn't matter. You were a Jew and you said Good Shabbos or Shabbat Shalom. And that was how I grew up, with a very Jewish, very accepting childhood and reality. As I said, my grandparents were survivors. My mom wanted me to go to, it's called the March of the Living, where you
Yep.
go to, I think you did it, right? Am I
Mhm.
thinking about?
I
So you,
planned to do it and then I twisted my ankle. But anyway,
okay.
yes, please continue.
So you go to Poland and you visit camps and you visit ghettos, and then you go to Israel. So I went thinking I knew everything I needed to know about the Holocaust, growing up with grandparents who cried on a daily basis, who my grandfather couldn't get through a prayer without crying. I mean, the Holocaust, I knew the word Holocaust before I knew the word feminism by far. And I said, I don't really need to go. And then my mom was kind of insistent. So I went. And little did she know it would lead to me moving to Israel, because I stood in a Polish cemetery, a Jewish Polish cemetery, and it was vandalized and destroyed. And we're talking, I was 92. And I just felt like this feeling of they're never going to leave us alone. Like even in death, they don't leave us alone, that they have to destroy a cemetery. So I said, you know what? I'm just never going to live under non-Jews ever again in my life. Like I'm leaving, I'm going to Israel. And this was before I went. And then I went to Israel. We were here on Independence Day, on Memorial Day, and it was so moving and it was so home that I came back from that trip and I said to my mother, I'm moving to Israel. And she said, you're finishing college first, which I thought was fair. So I finished college and I immediately moved to Israel. Just to fast forward, I met my now husband in one of these classes, went back to Jersey, got married, lived here, went back and forth. I'm here now 18 years. But the last time that I moved to a city called Beit Shemesh. And if you know anything about Jewish extremism, you will know Beit Shemesh. So I had the Aliyah glasses, which is the rosy glasses of like, well, the signs are in Hebrew, and oh my gosh, the mail doesn't come on Saturday, it comes on Sunday, and they'd say Happy New Year in September and not in January. All those things that are so like exciting for someone who grew up outside of Israel, because it's a Jewish place. Um, but then I kind of started to see things that I didn't recognize that were being done in the name of Judaism. Like I actually have them here. I should have pulled them out. But I have a lot of um advertisements that would uh, girls' faces were blurred out. Women were only shown from the back. or literally blurred, like actually like costume Purim, which is like a Halloween. They had Purim costumes, little girls and little boys in costumes, and every girl's face was blurred. And I'm like, what is happening? At first, the first few times you see it, you think somebody made a stupid PR mistake, like somebody did not check this ad. And then you realize, no, it's being done on purpose. And then my daughters came home one day from school. They were 10 and 7 at the time, and they told me they were told to sit in the back of the bus because that's where girls belong. And you don't tell an American to sit in the back of the bus. Okay. And you certainly don't tell my daughters. So my daughters were just like, I said, did you move? They're like, no. I said, okay, good for you. But obviously there's a bigger problem here. So that was happening. And at the same time, my husband's aunt was being denied a divorce. Just very quickly to go over, halacha is Jewish law. Jewish law is called halacha. In halacha, a man has to grant the divorce. Okay. Jewish marriage is more of a kinyan, an acquirement as opposed to a partnership. I mean, technically speaking, we're talking about the terms of Jewish law. It's technically an acquirement where the man acquires the woman and then he has to then allow her to go. So she was being denied a divorce by her husband who had been in jail and who wasn't supporting her, and he was a real winner. And like all good Jewish criminals, he ran to Israel where I was residing. So I wound up being kind of her representative in the Jewish court system. Now, going back to what we were saying before, in Israel, there's a very strange mix of democracy and Judaism. So all the secular laws are democratic. We have elections all the time. We have Arabs and non-Jews and whatever in parliament and doing whatever, and women can do anything they want, except when it comes to religious courts. Every religion has their own courts. So if you're Christian, you get married by a priest and divorced. I don't actually know how Christians get divorced, but it goes through the Christian methodology. And Muslims go through the Sharia court system. And Jews go through the Beit Din system, which is the rabbinic court system. So what happens is if a woman can't, she kind of has to prove that she needs or that she deserves a divorce. She can't just walk in and say, I want a divorce, and then it happens. Because if the guy says no, then you go through a whole process, okay? So if two people come to the court and they say, we don't want to be married anymore, the court just kind of processes the whole thing. But if someone says no, then you have a problem. And most of the time, it's the women who wanted the divorce, who want the divorce, and the men are saying no. So all of this is happening at the same time. Now, I walk into the rabbinic court. Now, I became religious at 18. I've skipped over that part, but I became religious at about 18 years old, and I chose Torah. I chose Judaism because even if there's, some of it that seems really old-fashioned or sexist or whatever to me, well, I'm not going to throw away my husband because I love 98% of the things he does and I hate 2% of the things he does. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do what I can. It's the same with Judaism for me. Like I love 98% of what Judaism is. That 2% that's kind of rubs at my craw, I just try to work with it and do what I can. So I walk into this rabbinic court thinking, okay, I'm going to help my aunt get a divorce. Well, I was slapped in the face with apathy and chaos and pain and devastation at the intense lack of agency that a woman has. The fact that she has to prove that she deserves a divorce, the fact that she has to give her intimate secrets as to why she wants a divorce to a room full of men, mind you. Please remember, women can't be judges in Orthodox Judaism. So there's 3 Orthodox men on this dais, the husband and his lawyer, most often men, right? Yeah, men. The woman and her lawyer. And until 15 years ago, 20 years ago, women were not allowed to represent other people in court. So you didn't even have a female advocate for a woman. So she's it used to be that she was the only woman in the courtroom. Anyway, it was a disaster. So it took me many years to get my aunt a divorce, many years. And in these years, I had a crisis of faith. I had to say, like, am I just walking away from what has become of Orthodox Judaism? Am I going to step up or step away? I felt like those were my 2 choices because I either had to get out or I had to fix it. And I think you asked me the question, how did I start? I think being the daughter or the granddaughter of survivors, and when I say granddaughter of survivors, I mean, they raised me. Like my grandparents were my best friends, and I knew intimately they used to, their life lessons that they learned are instilled, like they're written in my heart. And the one thing that they always told me was don't be a bystander no matter what. They said the Poles were worse than the Germans because the Poles were our neighbors. And they stood by, and either they were like literally said, "Oh, the Jews are over there," or they didn't do anything. And so I think the lesson that I got from my grandparents were don't be a bystander. So if someone is being hurt, if if injustice is happening in front of me, I don't really have much of a choice to do nothing. It's not in my DNA. So I decided that I was going to fight. And I started writing. This was when the Times of Israel opened up its blogs many years ago. Now everybody has a blog, but back then it was a super new thing. And I started writing about what I was seeing. I think it was called The Hijacking of Judaism, Its Victims and Consequences, was the first real blog I wrote about this. And it was shared thousands of times. Like it was for me, it was just cathartic. I was just kind of like getting out and getting my anger out there. Sorry. And it was shared thousands of times with many, many comments. And I got letters. I got letters from women and men all around the Jewish world saying, I see this happening here. The women are being erased in my town. Women are being put in the back of the bus in my town. Or I'm an aguna. An aguna is someone who is a woman who's chained in marriage. I got so many letters that it became clear that what I was seeing wasn't just happening in Beit Shemesh, but it was happening in other Orthodox places around the world. And they were begging for help. And so it kind of spiraled from that into advocacy for women, spotlighting what's going wrong. Because I think what happens is it's kind of like with anything, if you don't see it in front of you, and I think that you could probably feel this, Yasmine, because you lived it, but if people don't see abuse, if people don't understand that abuse happens, they're so unaware and they just act like it doesn't really happen, or it happens only in the most extreme cases and everything else is fine. So I felt very obligated and inspired, motivated, I should say, to shed light on what was going on. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And at a certain point, it became clear that people understood that things were happening, but they didn't know what to do about it. Right? So you can call attention to a problem, but if you don't give people something to do, a way to respond, a way to fix things, it quickly becomes despairing.
Mhm.
So basically, we started an organization, me and other activists who were working in this space. I'm just giving you the brief overview. You can stop me and ask me questions. We started an organization that was providing resources. So, for example, we see in my synagogue, they put out this year's directory, um, pictures, but only of the men. What do I do? This is different. It's never happened before. How do I respond? How do I not be seen? And women are always very afraid, and for a good reason, of being seen as troublemakers. How do I say something without being seen as a troublemaker or as being immodest? Of course, modesty is, I'm sure, a word that you love
Mhm.
just as much as
Mm.
me.
A lot of
Um,
this is so familiar. Yeah.
so we started giving help and resources, and this is how you can talk to this, and this is and we just started like writing about it and talking about it, and like you said, we have this photo bank, which you can see some of the pictures behind me. I think I don't know how to do my camera so that you can see them, but a lot of everything on my wall is ours. These are things that we have produced so that, you know, it's now the mainstream Orthodox world. There are no pictures of women in magazines, which is not the way it was, which is not halacha, it's not Jewish law, but it's become the cultural norm. And it took them 15 years to make everyone comfortable with not seeing women. And I'm saying we're going to put women back in the picture, and we're going to not do it in a in your face way. I'm not talking about bikinis, okay? I'm talking about normal, beautiful, holy pictures of Jewish women, girls, and families together doing Jewish things or doing sports. But when you are normalized to something, then the opposite becomes almost not almost, it becomes tantalizing. So we have, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people around the world, especially people from Hasidic backgrounds. They couldn't even, a lot of the boys couldn't even look or to a woman in like a cashier and hand her money without feeling like they were doing something dirty, because the idea of seeing a woman was made to be so ingrained as a sin that they couldn't function. And I'm saying, if Judaism is held together by its family. We always talk about mishpacha, the Jewish family, right? If we're held together by our family and we're destroying that ability to see one another in a normative setting, we are destroying that core group, that core family. And so we talk a lot about the dangers of extremism, especially because, and I'm sure you have so much to say about this, but when you leave the confines of law, of boundaries, and you go off the deep end, there's no stopgap. So now we have women walking around in full burqas, full, that's what it's called, right? Niqab or burqa,
Yep.
where your
Yep.
face is
Both.
completely covered,
Hmm.
even though that has nothing to do with Judaism at all. Because when you take away the borders, and it says in the Torah clearly, these are my laws. Don't go to the right, don't go to the left. But for some reason, Orthodoxy is very afraid of the left, but super cool with the right. And
Hmm.
I'm trying to let people understand this is more dangerous, because at the bottom of the slippery slope on the left is like a female rabbi, but the bottom of the cliff at the right is dead women. And I can tell you that because this actually happens to be our poster for breast cancer screening, mammograms. We found through our work that Orthodox women were getting screened for breast cancer 30% less than the rest of, even less than the Arab women, even less than Arab women, because the women's health wasn't discussed and it was seen as immodest. And so you have 34-year-olds dying of cancer that they didn't know they had because they didn't know the signs of breast cancer. And this is because of a false sense of what is modest and what is not. I'm yielding for a minute because I could go on
I have
forever and I hope I
so
covered.
many questions. There's so much I want to ask you. So first of all, your aunt, for her to get for her to get the divorce,
Mhm.
um, why did you go to a Beit Din? Why did you go to a Jewish court? Why could she have not gone to, is there a secular court system in Israel?
Okay, so there is a secular court system, but it's actually a throwback from the Ottoman Empire, where for things like marriage, divorce, burial, conversion, all of that comes only through the religious courts. So Muslims have
Oh,
Sharia, Christians have, I don't know exactly what it's called,
right.
and the
So
Jews
any
have the rabbinic
family
courts.
court issues?
Anyone in this country who's married Jewishly has to go through the rabbinic court to get a divorce. There's no civil divorce. There's no
Okay,
civil
that was my
divorce.
question. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's tons of agnostics and
Hmm.
atheists in Israel, but they still have to go to whatever
If they get married
religion.
Jewishly, they have to go, and if
Mm,
they get married Islamically, then they have to go to Sharia.
mm,
The only thing you can do now in Israel is called Yadua B'Tzibor, which is like a common law marriage where you just declare yourselves together. So you can
mm.
do that, but most people want a Jewish wedding,
Of
right? Like
course,
most
yeah.
people want a Jew, and nobody goes into marriage thinking I'm going to get divorced. And so you'll
Yeah,
have
yeah.
uh, listen, there's 11,000 divorces around in Israel a year. Most of them are mutual. Both people want it.
Hmm.
But when it comes to one, usually the guy saying no, that's where you have the problems.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm only asking that because in so many Islamic countries there is no other option. You know what I mean? So like if you're in Saudi Arabia and you want to get a divorce, if you're a man and you want to divorce your wife, you just have to use your magical vocal cords. You just say you are divorced three times and that's it, right? But if you're a woman wanting to get a divorce, you have to go through this exact same system. You have to go through the
Hmm.
court system. You have to like beg and plead and encourage and convince the judge
Yes.
that you should be divorced from this man. And so whatever evidence you bring forth too, they gaslight you. They say, it's not so bad or whatever. Like, unless it's something like, even he beats me isn't good enough in an Islamic court, right? Because
Yeah.
that's legal. He's allowed to beat you, right? So it has to be very specific things like he does not provide food for me and
Hmm.
my kids or something like that. Unless it's something that bad, like we're homeless, then it's very difficult to get granted a divorce.
Yeah.
Um, but I just thought that, there's in the UK, there's tons of Sharia courts, right? But
Hmm.
you don't have to go to a Sharia court. You have the option of going to a
Right,
civil court. And so
right.
I was just wondering if, but it sounds like women are
There's no,
just,
the
this is it.
only body that can divorce you is a rabbinic court. And the reason for that is, aside from the Ottomans, it's because, well, in Judaism, if a woman is married to a man and has a child with another man, that child is a mamzer, which is it's translated as bastard, even though it's not the actual translation. But it basically means that that child is a category of person that can't marry anyone other than that category of person. It's a terrible,
Oh,
ancient, horrible, and to the credit of the courts, they do everything they can to not have these people declared as mamzerim, as a mamzer, but it is a I mean, I don't say it's a throwback. It's in the Torah. If a woman,
and
the whole point is that if you get a civil divorce without a get, it can be a problem in this regard.
I see. So another question for you. What are the options for you for change? Like, is there a process for reforming these court systems in Israel? Do you think that that might even be an option?
So I can tell you this. There has been, as an activist, and I didn't have any training as an activist. Everything comes from my experience. So I'll tell you that in my 14 years or so of being an activist, I have seen change within my own lifetime, and I have seen change from other older activists who explained to me how it was in their lifetime. And so I can say, yes, there is change. And I'll give you two examples that are wonderful phenomenons that have changed life for people in these courts. So as I said, 20 years ago, there were no women in the courts, right? But a few people got together and said, we need to train women in Jewish law. We need to give them the knowledge and the ability, the confidence to go in and represent women in these courts. And they did. And they created this incredible course that gave these women the knowledge, both halacha, Jewish law, and legally in Israel. And they had to use the Supreme Court. This is where it gets super, super awesome in a way. Israel has a secular Supreme Court and, well, a secular court system, including the Supreme Court. They usually don't mix. The civil courts don't like to tell the rabbinic courts what to do because they feel like they should function on their own and they really shouldn't be, on top of them. However, when things like civil rights clash, for example, women were trained, but the rabbinic courts didn't let them in the doors. They
Mhm.
refused. They said, this is new. This has never been before. You know how men really like new things.
Yeah.
Traditional Orthodox men don't like new things. So they said no. And then they went to the Supreme Court and forced them to let them in. And they forced them to listen to them. And it took time, but now these women are not only a regular part of the court process and system, but the judges will tell people, go to this organization and these women will advocate for you and they'll tell you what to do. So now the relationship between the judges who, refused to have them at first, now they work together, which is a massive change.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
happened, within the past 20 years. Um,
Mhm.
Beyond that, as you said, women have to kind of prove that they have the rights. So now there's a different understanding of domestic abuse. There's a different understanding of why did you stay. There's a different understanding of a woman not being able to tell you everything she's gone through because you're three dudes in a courtroom who she doesn't know, and the guy's standing right there. So even just you're not even talking about changing Jewish law, right? A lot of people are very afraid of touching halacha, of trying to bring down the Torah, but you don't have to change halacha to train a judge to understand victim mentality.
Mhm.
Because what does a guy understand? What does a person who's not been through abuse, but he's been beating her for 8 years. Not normal, the average person will say, what'd she stay for? Because he
Yeah.
doesn't understand. She has no money, the children, he threatened, all of these things, manipulation. All these things that we understand now that we didn't understand before make a difference in how these judges are able to see who comes before them to
Mhm.
say no, you're going to jail, right? Because in Israel, the rabbinical court can say to a guy who's refusing, if you don't give your wife a get, you're going to jail. Okay. And they
Mhm.
can, and they
Mm.
do. Not as often as they should, but they do. So there is change. And I would say to you though,
Okay, wait,
as
sorry, hold
yes,
that thought. Don't forget what you're about to say. Just a quick question. So the judge can't grant her a get. The judge just has to force the husband to do it. Okay.
correct.
Wow.
They can in Jewish law, there's something called uh, it's avoiding of the marriage. He can void the marriage if, for example, the woman says, I married this guy thinking he was healthy and well. Turns out he has bipolar that he hid from me. That is a deceit that came before, and she has every right to go in and say, this is, and they can do it. They don't like to do it. They don't do it enough, but they can do it. And that's one of the things we are working towards, letting them understand that if they don't utilize their own power, if they don't, then Jewish marriage doesn't have any holiness, right? Like if a guy can deceive someone and bring her into a marriage, they always say Jewish marriage, but that's not in my. That's what I said to the judges in my aunt's case. Like Jewish marriage, I go, how you call this Jewish marriage? He's living with another woman in China. What are you upholding? Something that doesn't
Yeah.
exist. So there's a lot of even just not seeing each other as enemies. I try very hard in my activism, and I understand why. Trust me, burning down the patriarchy, I'll throw the first, pitch,
Hmm.
but at the same time, you have to know what you can and can't change. And if I can make things better by working with them, by showing them that we want the same things, we want holy marriage, we want dignified divorce, then that's what I'm going to do, right?
Hmm.
I will do what I need to do for the cause. So I just wanted to say that there is change within the system, but there's also change in the community. And that's where we do most of our work. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I don't try to change the laws. I will help other organizations. I do a lot of collaborations because I really believe in using your strength and using other people's strengths to get things done. But I believe that real change only comes when the community wants that change or doesn't want that change. Because at the end of the day, you can change whatever law you want. It's illegal in this country to not show women. But people do it all the time because they think they're above the law, because they think that they're holier, right? But if you can change the community and get women to say, I will not buy a magazine that doesn't have women in it. If you can get men to do the same thing, I mean, it shouldn't just be women. But if you could say, I'm going to sign a halachic prenup, which is I promise not to refuse my wife or husband a divorce if they ask for it, and if I do, you, Beit Din, have the power to force me or to give it to her.
Hmm.
These are things that the community can do for itself, and we try to work very hard with the community to say, no one's coming to save us. Okay, we have to save ourselves. If we want change, we have to be part of that change. So
Hmm.
that's why we do the projects that we have. I have Rate My Beit Din, which for the first time ever, it's like a Yelp, but for rabbinic courts.
Judges?
So they're
Oh.
so they get to so they get to rate them. And the
Mm.
judges don't like it because there's no authority above them. Right now, there's no transparency. And all of a sudden, there's reviews. So again, I'm not looking to shame anyone. I'm not looking to
Mm.
burn anything down. But if you're a public servant and if you're serving the community, then you're going to be reviewed. And that's
Mhm.
completely, in my mind, that's the way things should work. So that's what we're
Mhm.
doing.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And that is something that 100% needs to get done. I mean, this man is in China married to another woman. Why is he hanging on to your aunt? It is just out of simply because, because he's a
Spite,
dick.
control.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, like I mean,
Yes.
there's no other reason. So, and men in Islam do this all the time. You know, the polygamy thing, you can have up to four wives. They don't divorce her, right? They'll just leave
Mm,
her. And he's still got three slots open. And so he'll just
right.
go off and he'll marry some other woman, have kids, live his life, and then this first wife or second wife or third wife, he can do this as many times, up until he fills his all his slots. She's
Right.
just left there. She can't travel on her own. She can't go to school. She can't do anything if she's in a
That's
Sharia
terrible.
country, right? She's
Right.
entirely trapped.
Wow.
And, it's a way of imprisoning her to sort of punish her
It's
because she didn't want
control.
to be married to him. It's control. And so if the judge doesn't, like you said, if the judge isn't using his power, then what are we doing here? What's the point? Like we're just
Exactly.
you're just allowing these men to control these women. Like, no, you have the power to grant this woman a divorce. So please go ahead and do that. Like, you don't want to be part of the
Right.
reason why this woman is imprisoned, right?
Exactly. And by the way, this also goes back to education. I have sons and I have daughters. Every single child of mine, number one, will be signing a prenup. I have one married son, he's signed it. And number two, knows that, I mean, like before we even get there, we're not even to talk about controlling and not giving a divorce, but this is how you're a mensch. This is how you behave. This is what a relationship looks like. This is not, abuse or control or whatever. These things are not at all part of what we are and who we do. And I really believe, or who we are and what we do.
Mhm.
I really believe that if we want to see, I know if we want to see none of this, if we don't want this phenomenon anymore, and we want, no agunot, and we want holy marriage and dignified divorce, we need to educate our children
Mhm.
and our friends. This is just not
Mhm.
what you do. I always say refusing a divorce should be as unkosher as pig, right? Because no Orthodox guy worth his salt would ever be caught dead looking near a pig. You wouldn't be near it. And that's what I want to see when it comes to get refusal. I want them to think, oh no,
Of course, I
absolutely
wouldn't do
not.
that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because you're normalizing it within the community, kind of the opposite way of what when you were talking about the photographs of women, that it's become so normalized to cover up women so that now boys and are uncomfortable, even interacting with the cashier at the local market or whatever, because it's like, oh my God, it's a female,
Hmm.
which coming from a similar cultural bullshit misogyny, it's like you are turning women into nothing but sexual beings. That's it. They are just sexual objects. When you hide them like that, and then for this boy to like feel nervous about interacting with a girl, it should be just as it's just another human being. You know what I mean? But
Right.
for the way they turn women into just basically like this shameful,
Yes.
sexual, dirty object. So they are the
Yes.
ones doing that to us, and then they punish us for it, right? Cover yourself
Right.
up
So
because you're shameful and dirty.
exactly. And of course, but they don't say that. They say you're a gem. You're a jewel.
Yeah, that's
You
right. Do
are,
they say
you're a
the same thing in the
queen.
Orthodox community?
Yes.
God, everything is plagiarized. That
It's
is
yeah,
exactly what they say. It's like a
it-
diamond. Yeah, you have to be protected. And my mom would
yeah.
be like, "So if you had a big, beautiful diamond ring, what would you do?" I was like, "I'd wear it on my finger." And she's like,
No, right.
"No,
No, you
you'd
put it
hide
in
it
your safe
away." And I'm
under
like,
lock and
"No,
key.
actually, I wouldn't."
Listen, I think, and I've said this before, like on Israeli television when they interviewed me, I said, pornography and the erasure of women are this two sides of the same coin. You are both exploiting women as you're treating women as sexual objects, whether you erase them or whether you expose them. That's what's happening. You're removing her humanity. You're removing. So to
Beautiful.
tell me that it's because we honor you, honey, I don't need your honor. I need your respect. Okay? I don't need to be treated like a jewel. I need to be treated like a human being. And people think it's about feminism, and I couldn't care less what they think. But my point is, this is not, for me, about some amorphous idea of feminism or equality. The erasure of women, the sidelining of women, the marginalization of women, the silencing of women causes tremendous damage, not only to girls and women, but to the whole community. We've seen it. I've studied it. There's no question about it. It's not, people say to me, oh, Shoshana, it's just a picture. What's the big deal? It's not just a
Mm.
picture. It's not just a picture. When you remove women, you alter reality. When you remove girls and half of the population, you alter perceptions. And I'm just going to bring this back, by the way, to the war, because those young women and all of them who were these lookout women, they were all young women. And there's no doubt in my mind that a large part of them being ignored is because they were young women. Yes, it
Hmm.
was arrogance. Yes, it was we didn't believe the Hamas would want a war. Yes, we thought that giving them Qatari money would make them happy. Yes, we were wrong on all those accounts. But if someone is saying to you, I see terrorists at the border, they're training in mock kibbutzim. I see it with my eyes. And you say, go back to your desk and forget about it? What?
Hmm.
Don't tell me this had nothing to do with misogyny.
Hmm.
It did. And I
Yeah,
see
I
this
mean,
all the time.
Israel is still in the Middle East, and like
Yes.
60 or more percent of people in Israel, you know, are from countries like Yemen and Egypt and Morocco and Syria and Iraq, you know.
Hmm.
So it's no surprise that you're going to be dealing, especially compared to being born and raised in America, there's going to be a stark difference when it comes to women's rights. You're going to see a lot more sexism. You're going to see a lot more misogyny. That's something that, there's something that you have to kind of go through and grow through,
Hmm.
um, just like so many other countries. But yeah, it must be especially frustrating, I think, when you're in a religious or Orthodox, because obviously most Jewish people are agnostic, and these are kind of conversations that they're not going to have a problem having. You know what I mean? Like when you talk about erasure of women, you're talking about women getting divorced. It's like these are easy, these are civil rights, these are easy questions for them to answer. But when you're dealing with the religion, so let me give you a kind of a comparison example, like in Islam, because the Quran says that men can beat their wives. In fact, it instructs men to beat their wives if they are disobedient or if they fear arrogance from them. That makes it infinitely more difficult for women, to try and get domestic violence to be criminalized in Muslim
Yeah.
majority countries because they keep on referencing back to what it says in the Quran, right? Same thing with child marriage, same thing with so many other issues. So having the religious edicts just makes it so much more difficult to fight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
I, I will say that to give credit where credit is due, Israel definitely, domestic violence, things like that they're not legal. None of that is legal. Ironically, bigamy is not legal, but the Bedouin community gets away with it. It's the Bedouin community that which is a bit of a whatever, we don't have to get into it, but
mhm,
um women's rights here, it's what I was saying is in secular terms, in being ministers and stuff, although this government has the fewest women in decades. So sometimes it really does feel like we're going backwards, even though in the books everything is, good, but in actuality, it doesn't necessarily play out. And it's something that a lot of women's organizations are really grappling with right now, on top of everything else that we're dealing with.
mhm.
We're dealing with
Yeah.
that here. It's not
Yeah,
easy.
and that leads me to my next question, which is when you say on top of everything else, like obviously anti-Semitism has just like blown up across the globe. It's become normalized. It's become, in fact, beyond normalized. It's become celebrated. Like if you're not an anti-Semite, then you must be somebody who believes in like um, apartheid and colonialism and da 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 da, right? So. Um, in countries like Canada, where I'm from, it's just been extreme. Like there's just violence in religious schools, synagogues being attacked after the increase of anti-Semitic attacks in the past 15 months have been like 670%, like absolutely astronomical numbers. And do you find, I know most of your work is in Israel, so maybe this isn't going to be true for you, but do you find that sometimes you find yourself kind of almost resistant sometimes to do the work that you're doing because there's these anti-Semites kind of foaming at the mouth, so excited that they have something that like a bludgeon that they can use against Jewish
Sure.
people?
Absolutely. Ever since October 7th, particularly, I've always actually kept the work that I do of women advocating for Jewish women within the Jewish, within the Orthodox world or within Israel. I keep it to mostly Facebook and Instagram. My Twitter is mostly, I still call it Twitter, sorry, Elon.
Yeah.
My Twitter is mostly Israel advocacy because of the audiences. I don't want to give fodder to the anti-Semites. It's an internal problem. And as much as I believe
Mhm.
in sunlight being the best disinfectant, it has to be the sunlight in the right places, right? Because if it's not seen by the people, or if I'm seen as someone who is causing, God forbid, harm to the Jewish community, well, I'm not going to get anywhere either. So, yes, it is very difficult. And moreover, I'll give you a moreover. Some people don't like, they're very uncomfortable with, I'm sure you've seen this. Um, they call it in Hebrew machloket or machlekes, which means division or disagreement. And they say, why are you bringing disunity now? Why are you, honey, I'm not bringing the disunity, right? Like when people who talk about abuse are basically accused of doing, of causing disunity or of causing arguments, but really it's the abuse that needs to be stopped, not the advocate. And so I get it from all sides, right? Like I get it
Yeah.
even sometimes from people inside who say, how can you talk about these things? And I say, I'm really sorry, but I can advocate for Israel, for Jews, in the outside world. I can advocate for Israel in the outside world, and I can work to fix the internal problems that we have because doing one without the other does nothing. Does nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yes, it's hard. The balance is very difficult. Yes, I have silenced myself at certain times. Yes, I've waited to say certain things, or I have made sure that the audience was a different audience, or I only do it in the Knesset versus online.
Yeah. I mean, I left Islam decades ago. I'm not a Muslim anymore. And a lot of the advocacy that I'm doing, obviously, is for Muslim women. And now seeing that, you know, certain people, you mentioned Elon Musk, he's one of them. Like when he speaks out, or other when he's sharing, things about Islam and Muslims, like I feel like, ah, shit. I didn't want you as an ally. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is not like no. So it's
Yep.
and it happens quite often with right-wing Christians in America. They're like, yeah, yeah, I totally support you because Jesus is king. And I'm like, so it gets, yeah, it's this space where you want to somehow you want to protect it with people that have integrity and that are pure and
Yeah.
honest and are and actual humanitarians and who are really looking out for what's best for human rights, right? But unfortunately, it's constantly being threatened
Gets
with
messy.
interlopers who have their own agendas and who are hoping to use, to grab something that you've said to use it as evidence for whatever,
I feel like
bullshit that they want to spew. Hmm.
Jews are often used as that political football, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, I remember, I think it was, I don't even remember what was going on, but it was between Trump and the Democrats, and like, each one of them was using us for their ends, and I'm just like, oh my God, can you just
Hmm.
leave us alone? Like,
Yeah.
just get it
Yeah.
out of your mouths. Like,
And
I
and
can't handle it.
none of it is genuine. None of it
Yeah.
is genuine, right? I really don't believe any of it is genuine. I think that a lot of it is just it's just like the virtue signalers on the left too. They also do it, right? Like when it comes to like Pride Month, suddenly they're all
Mm.
changing their profile pictures to like rainbows or whatever. But when you talk about, hey, did you know that in 15 Muslim majority countries, people are executed for being gay? And they're like, we can't talk about that. That's Islamophobic. You don't really care then, do you? You don't really care. You just want to do something fun and easy and to look
Of
like you
course.
care.
Yeah, well, it's like England with these rape gangs. I mean, oh my, I've just read a little bit, and when did it become worse to be racist than a rapist?
Yeah.
What
Yes. And that
happened?
that was the lead up to what happened on October 7th for all of these people to deny that all of these women were raped. It's the exact same mindset. They have the wrong rapists. If their rapist was a white man or if their rapist was a Jewish man, then they would have support of the international community.
Sure,
But if your
sure.
rapist is a brown-skinned Pakistani British Muslim or a brown-skinned Palestinian in Gaza, then we're just
Yeah.
gonna believe all women except for those ones, right? Except for the Hindu girls in Pakistan, except for the Christian girls in Nigeria, except for the Yazidi girls in Iraq, right? Those are the ones that we don't want to talk about. Those are the ones that we're just going to erase them, basically, you know.
It's very
So that's what
painful.
happened. That's what happened in Britain, and thousands of girls for years all
It's
being
beyond.
tortured in these rape gangs. And if you spoke out against it, you were the one who
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
just like,
We're automatically
mm,
branded as as racist or as Islamophobic. And I want to tell you something. There is a brilliant, brilliant PR marketing machine going on. And there's a perfect storm of money going into American universities from Qatar, from even
billions.
Iran, like billions of dollars. And Americans aren't saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Why is Qatar
Mhm.
investing billions of dollars into these universities? You don't think
Mhm.
there's a correlation between that and what we're seeing, what we've been seeing on the campuses for a year,
Of
what we're seeing
course
on the
there is.
streets? Of course,
Mhm.
you have faculty that is BDS, that is rewriting history. Wikipedia just had to, what was the issue? I don't remember exactly. Wikipedia finally hopped, which means finally understood that it was being utilized to for misinformation, and that it certainly can't catch as many people as are doing it. But there is a massive machine for decades going on of BDS, money into the universities, anti-Israel, and making sure that everybody knows that if you accuse someone who's darker than you of a crime, you are going to be called a racist, and that racism is the worst thing you can be. This perfect storm has
Mhm.
come together to put us where we are right now, where you have America. I mean, I love the United States of America. I grew up in the United States. I don't recognize it. I don't
Mhm.
recognize it. I don't understand it. What, you're resegregating college campuses? Like,
Yeah.
what? And I'm old
Yeah.
enough to remember that the segregation is a bad thing, right? So I'm just blown away by the money, by the effort, and how far we are behind and how far we've fallen into it.
Completely agree with you. Yeah. And what Sam Harris said like a decade ago was if we don't get it right, we being the rational, liberal, open-minded, thinking people, if we don't get it right, then we're only going to leave space for like the crazies to come in and say the most
Hmm.
basic thing, and they will be treated as gods. Trump just has to come in and be like, Hamas are a terrorist organization. And everybody's like, yeah, like, how is this? How is this information that needed to be understood? Do you know what I mean? Like it's so obvious, but they did this. They
Yeah.
did this. They made it so insane that the most basic biological or, any kind of fact being said now by Trump is like lauded as heroic. We got ourselves into this mess. And now
So
people
I've
are saying,
said,
"Oh, he's going to get us out. He's going to save us." No, he doesn't care about you either. I'm sorry, any MAGA people listening. He doesn't love you. Okay? He's a narcissist. Elon is a narcissist. They're probably, sociopaths as well. They do not love you. They are
so what
going to be
I,
doing what they need to do in order to further their own
agenda.
self-interests.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
always say this in my work and also when it comes to Israel. We moderates need to be more extreme in our moderation because we're
Yeah.
so moderate and we don't fight back with fire and with passion that the extremists who are going to go full force on both sides, by the way, meaning if we're talking politics, they're going to run us over because we don't stand together and hold that middle ground. And
Yeah.
if we don't recognize that we have so much more in common than we don't
Mhm.
agree on, we're all going to lose. And so we need to
Mhm.
literally, like, I think of it as an image. If we don't stand and hold hands and keep that middle ground, we're going to lose it from both sides. And
100%
all we're going to
agree.
sit and do is blame each other at the end when we're
Yep.
underneath the left and the right who've come together to crush us.
Yeah. 100% agree. Because the left pulled it so far in this direction for so long that we're now, happy to have the other side to pull things back into alignment. But
Yeah, we have
and
to
then
stop.
what? Are we going to just be on
Right.
this pendulum forever? You're
But
right.
that's
We
what we
have to,
see.
yeah.
Erasing women is, in their mind, in their words, a response to the licentiousness. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So you're going to the other extreme, which is literally the same thing as them. Like, you can't fight extremism with extremism.
Yes, 100%. Girl, we should be running this world.
Amen.
All right. So we've got some questions and comments for you here. Cindy, I think you were first.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you so much, Shoshana, for speaking up today and for all the work you've been doing.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if you could clarify, because I know you're talking about the Orthodox community in Israel, and you've also explained that you're from New Jersey originally.
Mhm.
I'm from New York, from Brooklyn, so I also Ashkenazi background. So I hear where you're coming from. But I'm curious when you're talking about the Orthodox in Israel, if you're distinguishing, are you including Haredi community? Are you including, because I know there's also the, Sephardic communities
Mhm.
and um, so I'm wondering because in my experience and understanding of them, especially as an American Jew, is they're very different in some ways. So
Mhm.
I'm just wondering with the Beit Din. I don't know if it's if there are how the Beit if there are multiple Beit Dins or how
Mhm.
it works is Orthodox the same thing in Israel as it would be here, and are there different denominations and different is it all
Sure.
yeah, yeah,
So there are definitely different denominations, right? The word in Israel is Haredi or Haredi,
right.
which is more of the black hat, more of they don't go to the army as often, philosophically opposed to the army, most of them. Sephardim and Ashkenazim are different in a lot of ways, but when it comes to the Beit Din system, that is a state system. And they are in the end of the day state employees. So there are Sephardi, there are Ashkenazi, there are most of the judges are Haredi, most, but there are also Dati Leumi, which is, I guess, translated as National Religious or Modern Orthodox, depending on what your understanding is of the, different kippas, different yarmulkes, who are more liberal-minded, who have often a college education, whereas the Haredi do not, which is where a lot of this education comes in, meaning the more we can educate these judges in a secular way, which doesn't mean math or social studies as much as I mean sociology, psychology, victim mentality, understanding human interactions, narcissism, mental illness, the stuff that plays out in the courts. That's the most important thing. It's more important to get them to understand those aspects of humanity than it is exactly what background they come from. Because at the end of the day, the Torah, when it comes to divorce, the laws of divorce are pretty much the same regardless of where your background is from. And so sometimes your culture plays into it, like Sparta, much more traditional and patriarchal as a whole, generally speaking. I'm just going to say I'm generalizing. But at the same time, it's true. And their culture is different. Growing up in Morocco and growing up in Russia, two different things. So yes, there are differences. At the same time, the judges usually go using the same playbook and the social and cultural norms, and the education aspect, in my opinion, is the most important.
Okay. And could I ask just one more brief thing related to that? What percentage of Israelis would you say are Orthodox? Because
Mm.
at least, my experience and with having been there, and I have relatives that live in Israel, you know, uh, it seems like most of the people that I'm aware of are more, I mean, they're Jewish, but they're much more secular.
Traditional. Most
Yeah.
Israelis are traditional. I'm Orthodox, but I'm not Haredi. So the Haredi population is about between 18 and 20, depending on who you're counting as Haredi. Many more fit into the Datilumi slash traditional aspects, but almost every Jew, most Jews want to get married in a Jewish ceremony, which is why, or one of the reasons this is really an issue, because it's not a small percentage of people who go through these courts, right? Most people will have to, it's not, I mean, if they get divorced, they'll have to go through these courts. Um, I hope I answered your questions.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say too that even if it is a small percentage, it's still important to
Yep,
focus on this work.
absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. Mars, were you next or Paul? I don't know. Mars, you go ahead. Oh, sorry, Paul.
Thank you,
Want
Yasmine.
me to
Sorry
go?
about that. Paul,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Mark.
Why don't you go first? I'll wait.
Okay. Well, I know we're short of time, so I'll get right to the question. Uh, Obviously, Golda Meir was prime minister for a long time. She had to appear in a lot of photos. How did the Haredi community and others react to her photo being posted all over the place?
So as I said, this is a new phenomenon. And when Golda was the prime minister, newspapers did not censor her out. This is a really new phenomenon, and it is, I do think it is reactive to the social media era and the billboards era where like everything's in
I
your
think it is an
face.
error, actually. You were right.
That too. And they're responding to it by being even more into it. But it's also a marketing decision. I just want to make sure that people know these magazines, their editors, most of them don't believe that women can't be seen. But if I have 100 people and 10 of them won't let pictures of women into their house, right? And I want to sell magazines to everybody. I'm just going to remove the problem so I can get as much as possible. And that's what happened. It was a marketing decision to begin with, so that I could sell as many magazines as I could. And then they became the leaders, they became the norm. So I've had conversations and I've heard conversations. They don't really think there's a problem with women's images, but just to sell more magazines and to make everybody happy, right? Who's not included in that? That's what they do. So nobody had a problem with Golda's picture. To a succinct answer.
Thank you for that question, Paul. Mars.
Thank you. Shoshana, I I missed the first part of this podcast, so if this was already asked, please just jump over my question. Have you ever seen a film called Orthodox about the circumstances of some Jews who wanted to escape ultra-Orthodox communities in New York?
I don't think I've seen the whole thing, but I'm certainly well aware of the story.
Okay, the whole conversation you had with Yasmin on this podcast was really reminded me of that film. And you know, out of the big three, I don't think it's an untruth to say that Judaism is probably the most advanced of the big three that are probably three-quarters of the way into modernity. But there's still some stuff that's
Hmm.
fundamentalist. I think you already answered this question, but through your conversation. But I was hoping you might be able to flesh it out. When you bring these issues to light, that there's a word that's driving everyone who's been in the space insane regarding the problems in Islam, Islamophobia.
Hmm.
It sounds like you get pushback there as well, but how severe is it compared with Judaism being mostly modernized as opposed to Islam, which is still three-quarters back into the seventh century? Well, Judaism is so far forward. How severe is it when it comes between Islam and Judaism? Like in your opinion, your experience, um, what is that like?
Pushback from within the Jewish community or
Let's
pushback
say
from
that
outside?
like you have some ultra Orthodox Jews who are pushing back against your viewpoint, and like let's say like you're criticizing the treatment of women in those
Hmm.
in those communities. Do you ever get accused of being an anti-Semite, like some
Ah,
reformist Muslims get called unbelievably Islamophobic, that kind of deal?
sure.
What would you say the comparison is like in your experience?
Nowhere near as bad, first of all. I mean, it's nowhere near as bad. I think that Islam is known to silence critics, and Judaism is known for its debates. I mean, if anyone who actually reads the Talmud knows that you have two Jews, 15 opinions. And so there is at least a more open arena for disagreement. Now, people will say to me, you're anti-Haredi. People within the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, will say you're anti-ultra-Orthodox, or you're a wild feminist or something like that. And at the beginning, it kind of bothered me, and then I was just like, you're ridiculous. Like I don't even listen to it anymore. It's like skin, like my skin is much thicker, and I know that I'm doing this for Judaism. For me, the Torah is justice. For me, the Torah is about treating people. It's like Hillel the elder was once asked by a convert, a man who wanted to convert. He said, teach me the Torah on one foot. And he said, in one sentence, and he said, don't, with anything that's hateful to you, don't do to anyone else. The rest is commentary. Go learn it. And I firmly, strongly believe that at the end of the day, we were given the Torah to be the best people that we could be. It was given 3,000 years ago, and people forget that, right? So if the laws to us seem antiquated, they are. And the whole process of rabbinic Judaism is to take a religion that was given to people in the desert after coming out of slavery 3,000 years ago, and to use it and implement it today. And I recognize that that's a process. And I recognize that that takes time. And I recognize that not everyone's going to see it the same way. So as long as I know the difference between Jewish law, and there's some things that are enshrined in Jewish law, we don't eat pig, that's never going to change. But some things are just cultural or societal. So for example, where it may have been 3,000 years ago, men hit women, they hit their wives, and it wasn't considered abuse. Now we know that that's not the case. And so we change the way we see that within a divorce court, right? Within how we see it. And so when it comes to the erasure of women, we have challenges. There's no question, because the society and the culture is getting extreme. And we have to prove that this is devastating to the community. And I believe it will get worse before it gets better. I really believe it's going to get worse before it gets better, because women are taught to be submissive. We are taught to trust the rabbis. We are taught to listen. We are taught that our needs are secondary. And because when you take someone like that and tell her, well, you don't really need to be in a picture, right? Or, well, you can live with this, right? So it takes a long time for her and the wider female population to realize, no, I don't have to live with this, especially because we're kept less educated. So if you put all that together, it takes a long time to make that change, but I do see change happening. And so once in a while, if I get called anti-Haredi or whatever, it's just par for the course.
Thank you.
Oh, such a beautiful answer. And thank you for that question, Mars. It was a good question. And the first thing that popped into my head is we, for whatever reason in the West, we talk about protecting minorities and blah, 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 but that does not extend to Jewish people. So they use Islamophobia because they're trying to protect Muslims from criticism, but they would never call Shoshanna an anti-Semite because they don't feel like they need to protect Jewish people from any kind of criticism. So it's the coddling of Muslim people, the pandering to them is what causes it to be so much worse for me than it is for you, Shoshana, is because they think that they're going to defend Muslims against modernity, against progress, against criticism, right? But they unfortunately do not have that same
No.
desire to protect Jewish people.
No.
All right, Karen, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. And everything you say makes me want to ask more questions. So anyway, I can only pick one. So I have thought a lot in the past year or so, but really longer than that, that when women are subjugated, and Shoshana, you've alluded to this about how it impacts the boys, the way they interact. But I've sort of looked at it in the context of this war, that when a culture subjugates its women, those women have very little influence over their sons. And it makes me wonder how the women of Gaza, for example, or really any society where the men are behaving in whatever you want to call it, terrorism, radical behavior, is that really what the mothers would want? I would think not, but they don't get listened to. So it's a question for both of you about how have you thought about that? And also to illuminate the differences, how that plays out differently in Israeli society, because I know there's a little bit of it there, but maybe it's about relativity.
Mhm. I feel a little bit torn because I've seen mothers make change. I have seen mothers make change. So, for example, in Haredi schools, in ultra-Orthodox schools here, a lot of them don't teach English and math so that the men, boys, don't have the skills to go out and get a job, and that they're dependent on the leadership and any of the um, financial what's it called? Financial assistance that they can get from the government. Okay. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling thing because if I keep my population ignorant and unable to work, so then I control them. And it's a big thing here. And the mothers, who by the way do work, fathers don't work, mothers work, have been sending their boys to get English and math lessons so they aren't ignorant. So while they don't leave the community and they don't take them out of the schools, because leaving the community and taking out of schools impacts your marriage, impacts your meaning your marriage prospects or your marriage itself or the community and you're standing in the community, but they do allow their boys to be educated. So I do see that women can and do influence their children, specifically their boys, when they want to. The problem really becomes when they don't want to. Like I said, when they are educated to be submissive, when they're educated to that this is the best thing for you, when they're educated that this is the best thing for your boys, whether it's, and I'll let Yasmine speak about, Islam, but in Judaism, if you're told, and this is again, I hate to say Judaism because this is a new phenomenon. This is a new phenomenon. It was never a thing that men didn't work. It was never a thing that they didn't go fight. Like this is a new thing in Israel, and it goes back to Ben Gurion when the Torah world was decimated in the Holocaust. And in order to get support from the ultra-Orthodox community for an Israeli state, Ben Gurion promised that there were 400, that's it, only 400 young men would be able to stay and learn Torah as a profession full time. And because this is their profession, and they're going to rebuild the world of Torah, which is important to Jews, they would not be drafted. But when you don't change the laws after decades, now you have 60,000 as opposed to 400. And in Israeli law, if your Torah is your profession, you can't work until you're 27. So if they learn, they don't go to the army. If they don't go to the army, they can't work, which means the women have to work. So it's really something that the government itself has caused and needs to fix. Okay, but that's another subject. I'm sorry. Yasmine, why don't you answer about, moms and what you think about their influence?
Shoshana, when you keep saying it's new, but I was, fromish back in, like 30 years ago, and this was all playing out then too. So I'm not sure
Well,
what
new is 70 some odd years.
So you're saying like since the fact, I guess in the grand scheme of things. Yeah.
Well, we're a very old religion.
It's good to hear from you, Shoshana, that there are, there are mechanisms for change at least, you know what I mean? Because this sounds like these are legal matters or, political matters, so things can change. In the Muslim world, it's more of just a cultural thing. So it's not just within Arabs, it's within Iranians, it's within Pakistanis, it's within any Muslim majority country. You're going to see this same vastly different treatment of women versus men, of little boys versus little girls when they're growing up, right? From the very beginning, the gender segregation, the clarity in which everybody understands that this boy is so much more important, valuable, respected than you are. And so if you think of a little girl being born and raised in that society, in that household, it's perpetuated by everybody around her, her mother, her father, her cousins, the media, education, everything. When that little girl grows up to be a mom, you can just imagine how, how difficult, or how it would maybe not even cross her mind to think that she might be able to mold her son, or to help her son, or encourage her son to be something different or better, or to, treat both of her children equally or anything like that. It's a huge cultural shift that has to take place. And it is taking place in the Western world. So in America and, UK and Canada, et cetera, you can see on social media that there are a lot of Muslim families speaking out. There's a lot of Muslim mothers talking about how they're going to raise their sons to be different than the way that their husbands were raised. I mean, this is why a lot of Muslim men, it's just like they're just narcissists. They grow up from the moment they're born, they're just like little princes. I saw this Turkish man was like, "Hey, you want to see how nice Turkish moms are to their sons?" And he calls down the stairs. He's like, "Hey, mom, I'm ready for my tea." And she's like, "Do you want sugar, honey?" And it's like, that's not nice. Like, that's abuse. You're turning your son into this gross, disgusting goblin that is going to unfortunately be forced to marry some woman or she's going to be forced to marry him one day. Do you know what I mean? And then perpetuate this horrible cultural acceptance of I don't even know, like coddling isn't even enough of a word, like the way that these boys are treated. So as I was saying, in the Western world, people are starting because they're comparing, right? They're comparing the Western world that they're living in. They're seeing equality, they're seeing feminism, women are starting to feel a lot more empowered, speaking up even in mosques and stuff. But again, all of this is happening in the Western world. So for that change to happen, for the ripple effects to hit other areas of the world, I think it's going to take some time. There are lots of positive things that you can see. Obviously, the women of Iran burning their hijabs in the streets, and they are superhuman Wonder Women, right? Like we can see that they are not going to be raising, that generation of women are not going to be raising their boys to be coddled little princes. We can see in Syria, after now that, hopefully they will somehow, escape the fate of places like Iraq and Libya and others, that once they were able to get rid of their dictators, they ended up with some sort of Islamic regime. It looks like Syria might be the exception to that, maybe. I'm seeing a lot of Syrian women speaking up very boldly, very clearly about women's rights and about, basically, like you were saying, Shoshana, that feeling of not even knowing that you're valuable enough to deserve better. There are some women now that are starting to recognize, like, hey, we deserve better. I think a lot of it has to do with the internet, to be perfectly honest. Like, I know I kind of made a joke when I said social media error, which it kind of is. It's a double-edged sword, but social media is helping people to, they get access to podcasts and YouTube videos and, all sorts of, just even posts, all over, where they're starting to see, like, hey, I matter, my opinion matters, and why
Yeah.
should I put up with this? And that's not something that would have ever crossed their mind before, because they would have seen no examples of that. You can only be what you can see.
Exactly.
And now they can finally see it. So there's hope for the future, but obviously when we talk about the Middle East, what's happening in Israel is like light years ahead of what's happening in other areas of the Middle East. Even though Israel still has its problems too, every country has its problems, but it's at very vastly, unfortunately, big differences.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And even of the people who I know have gone from their life of extremism, whether it's extreme ultra Orthodox, and by the way, you can be ultra Orthodox without being extreme. I just want to be clear. Like, I'm not saying that every Haredi or every ultra, not at all, not at all. But I've interviewed Muslims Israelis who hated Jews, with like thought they'd grow up to be like you said, a Shahid, and was exposed to the internet and were like, whoa, everything I've been told is not exactly true, and are now advocates for Israel because they're like, I've been lied to my whole life, and you can't be what you can't see. You can't even imagine another reality if you're just kept here. Right?
Yeah.
Which it's just, you're right. Everything you said, I agree with.
Yeah. And this is true for international students too. Like that it's not just social media, but it's any way of, this is why I was saying before, like if you interact with Jewish people. Actually, I had one man on the podcast, his name is Mansour. He grew up in Saudi Arabia, never met a Jewish person in his life, but all he ever heard was, how they're just like these demonic beings that are evil and ruining the world. And for whatever reason, he walked into a Holocaust museum was when he was in Washington, D.C. And he said that he walked in those doors one man and he walked out a completely different man. It had never crossed his mind to consider that Jewish people could be victims, that they were humans, essentially. He'd never seen them as humans. He always saw them as like these superhuman, massive, forces of evil in the world. And so, yeah, as soon as you let the light in, whether it's your, travel or whether it's even, anything, then it allows people to open their minds and it allows these, it forces the cognitive dissonance to break. They can't accept this reality that they've been told their whole lives because they can see in front of them that that's not the truth. So hopefully that's the answer to all of this.
Yeah.
I always felt like if we, I'm saying it and I'm almost not believing myself, and I'll explain to you why I'm saying that, is because I always felt like for the longest time, I felt like there's so many Palestinians that have never met Israelis, and there's so many Israelis that have never met Palestinians. And I've heard so many stories. In fact, I'm going to have one woman on the podcast named Layla who lost her son in Israel because she was unable. Anyway, long story. You'll hear when she comes on the podcast. But she joined a group with mothers who'd lost their children because of intifadas or terrorists. And so it's like Jewish mothers and Palestinian mothers both grieving the loss of their children, coming together, and then they get it. Like they understand. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what a waste of time. What a waste of energy. What are we doing? But because they didn't see each other, they didn't see the humanity in each other before, it was easier to say like, well, they're the enemy, or they're just, a bunch of animals, or they're less than human, they're apes and pigs. Do you know what I mean? But once you meet another mother who's grieving in the same way that you are, and you relate at such a deep level like that, you can't believe the lies you were told anymore. Like it just won't work.
It's humanizing.
It's humanizing. Yeah.
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 So Shoshana, before I let you go, and thank you so much. I saw you furiously texting there. I know that I took a lot more time than I should have. But it's so
My
great
husband's
to
like, are
talk
you
to you.
still
And
on? I'm
honestly,
like, yes.
yeah. We could have talked for so much more. I mean, I absolutely adore you. I love the work you're doing. We are soul sisters in so many ways. And so grateful for you. So grateful for you coming on this podcast and having the bravery to share everything that you've shared, because I know, as we mentioned, it's not the easiest thing. You don't want to give fodder to the hatefuls, and you don't want your own community to feel like you are hateful. So you're stuck in this space. So to have the integrity and the honesty and the courage to speak out is incredibly difficult. And I genuinely understand that and acknowledge that and appreciate that, as I know so many people listening will as well. And before I let you go, I just want to make sure that there aren't any last words that you want to share with us. Maybe tell us where we can, learn more about you and your work, or anything that you'd like to tell us.
Sure. First of all, I would like to say that I have been a long admirer of you, Yasmine, and I feel that you coming out and speaking about your own pain and advocating because you want others not to go through it and you to make the change that you are making and to expose it for other people is it's so strengthening, enlightening, inspiring, and I do feel like we're soul sisters so very much. Um, I appreciate you also recognizing it. I don't know who your audience is. I know you have a massive audience, and I am a little bit nervous that some of the things that I've said might, make Israel look in a bad light or make Judaism look in a bad light. And so I think I would just like to say, I love Israel. I love Judaism. And that's why I fight for both. Because the idea that something is perfect is absurd. And the idea that, we're all human and the human condition is to make mistakes and to do things wrong. There's no playbook, right? There's no playbook. I keep telling people there's no playbook for a 3,000-year-old religion in 2025. There's no playbook for a new, ancient, modern country who's balancing democracy and Judaism. And so, of course, there's going to be problems, but yalla, let's be part of the solution and do it with
Yalla.
love. That yalla, yeah, exactly. So it's been an honor and a pleasure. I could also talk to you forever. My children are like banging on the doors. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who's been here. And yes, you can find us. I have my own podcast. Our organization has a podcast, Chochmat Nashim. I'll write it in the chat because who knows how to spell it? ChochmatNashim. Okay, that's Chochmat Nashim. And chochmatnashim.org as well. And it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. I love you, Yasmine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shoshana, and thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. And take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.